Okay. Hey, everyone. Welcome to our December mentoring webinar. Um, Today's guest speaker is Sara Wingerash, and it's Schlanger, correct?
Got it.
All right, we went over this. She is our Senior Director for Tuesday's Children, and I'll let her explain more when she gets into her portion of it. Mhm. All right, and I just wanted to, again, share what the vision is for our volunteer commission, and that is to empower all Kansans to meet community needs through service, and that the commission's primary role is to provide resources and leadership to support local initiatives that tackle community needs. As the State Service Commission, we basically are effective in providing resources and training to advance volunteerism, mentoring, and civic engagement. And how can you stay connected? Well, you can definitely visit our website. It's listed here at canserve.org. Please, if you haven't already, sign up for our monthly newsletter where you'll get all of our updated information, especially our rollout for the 2024 mini grant series. And you can sign up by just emailing us at volunteer@ksde.org. Feel free to invite us to present to other groups that may benefit from our resources. And you can always follow us on social media. We are on most of the major platforms. Just look for us under Kansas Volunteer Commission.
Oh, okay.
All right. Sorry about that, guys. All right. So before we get into it, I will go ahead and read off Sara's bio. I think it just has a stronger impact when you're able to hear it. Sara began her career at Big Brother, Big Sisters of Massachusetts Bay, where she learned the power of matching agents of change with children through a strength-based model. Sara went to Hobart and William Smith Colleges for her undergraduate experience and holds a master's in public administration from Suffolk University with a concentration in nonprofit management. She brings extensive knowledge of best practices in mentoring, including outreach, recruitment, and screening, as well as an instrumental understanding of the landscape of current services available to bereaved military families and their long-term needs for support and growth. Sara has designed and executed trainings for other mentoring professionals on supporting grieving children and has served on advisory boards and boards of directors at various nonprofits impacting positive change. Sara has been a guest at Capitol Hill to speak about supporting military bereaved youth, as well as being a spokesperson on the impact of mentoring. To date, Sara has directed all the peer mentoring matches and has been a crucial resource as Tuesday's Children continues digital expansion of our mentoring programming. Sara is a volunteer mentor to a ninth grader at St. High School through Empower Youth Network, as well as the president of the Parent Teacher Student Association at Timber Ridge Elementary School for the second year. So everyone, please welcome Sara.
Thank you.
I will pass it on to her.
Right. So in full disclosure, technology is not my friend. So I ask for your patience and grace as we kind of navigate this together. So I am sharing my screen, I hope, right now. Does everyone see kind of what says an opening slide? But not my notes, maybe.
Opening slide, no notes.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. I told Tierney earlier that I shot myself in the foot by getting two different monitors because now I've just further confused myself. So thanks everyone. I really appreciate the time to be with you, each of you today. And I really want to thank Tierney especially, as well as the entire team at Kansas Volunteer Commission. Truly the partnership that Tuesday Children has with the mentoring affiliates is so valuable, and it really allows us to amplify so much of our work, but also complement the work that so many different mentor affiliates have done. Mentor Kansas being at the top of that pile. So really, really grateful for this team. My name is Sara, and I've been part of the Tuesdays Children team since about 2006. I had a little tiny sabbatical in there where I was an executive director for a military nonprofit. And when Tuesdays Children ventured into the space of serving military families, and we'll talk more about that later, I was brought back. I actually live outside of Seattle, Washington, in a town called Snoqualmie, Washington. My pronouns are she, her, and Tuesdays Children is a national nonprofit. So we do have a beachhead office in Manhasset, Long Island, New York, as I'm sure you imagine. We operate on about a $2.2 million budget. And we have about 17 professionals that work here at Tuesdays Children. So my goal for today's talk is really to have an open dialogue with each of you. Tierney asked me to kind of give you the landscape in terms of what Tuesdays Children is, how we were formed, a little bit of our history after 22 years of service. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of trauma-informed care, or even some might call trauma-responsive model, to kind of be able to hopefully give you some takeaways from our time today. And if any of you are going to the National Summit in January, feel free to say hello. I will be there presenting with some of my colleagues, and I'd love to see you there. And I'm certainly interested in coming to Wichita, hopefully for the next conference. I would love that. So Tuesdays Children comes at this work in a unique way. We are a non-clinical organization, and I feel like that's really important to kind of level set our discussion today. Tierney shared with you my bio, and it's very clear that I am not a licensed clinical social worker. We come to this work really with an open heart and a general understanding of strength-based dialogue and post-traumatic growth. So being able to meet families where they are and certainly lend a supporting offering to them throughout their post-loss journey. So a little bit about kind of Tuesdays Children at large, and please let me know if my slides are not advancing. I know this is not my strong suit. So we are an organization that provides a lifetime of healing for families who have been forever changed by terrorism, military conflict, or mass violence. Our original service population was the 3,051 youth that lost a parent on Tuesday, September 11th. As I'm sure you've put it together, Tuesdays Children comes from Tuesday, September 11th. And we've later expanded to serve the 9/11 responders, anyone that was at ground zero, Fresh Kills Landfill, or any other recovery site. We usually don't use the term rescue because unfortunately there was very little rescue to be done. It was an offering where so many thousands and thousands and thousands of people came to the different sites of loss and were able to give families some closure in being able to recover their lost loved one. We also serve military families of the fallen, and that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today in terms of where Tuesdays Children sits with our various constituency bases on a day-to-day basis. So the emotional and devastating impact of Tuesdays, September 11th really fueled the creation for Tuesdays Children. We were started as a grassroots initiative. It was very much peers and friends and family that said, how are we going to stand in for those that lost parents and loved ones? One of our founders tells this story that when they were living in Manhasset, Long Island, and Tuesday, September 11th happened, they knew they had to do something because at the end of the day, they drove by the train station and they couldn't even count the number of cars that were still sitting in the commuter lot because of those people that would never return to their cars. It was very apparent to them that this was important work and it was touching so many people, especially in the New York area, and beyond. So a little bit more about our impacts. Over 2 decades, we've served more than 45,000 individuals for what we call our long-term healing model. It's a proven approach to building resilience, post-traumatic growth, and common bonds. We've expanded our services to respond to the ripple effects of Tuesday, September 11th, serving families of the fallen, as I've mentioned. And we are a trusted resource for families, children, and communities on their long road to healing after trauma and loss. So with appreciation for our friends at Judy's house, we're able to look nationally at the impact of bereavement on youth. So there's some good news, as awful as this slide is to kind of absorb. In 2021, the statistics were 1 in 12. Excuse me, 1 in 14. And I got that. Sorry, I apologize. So let me start again. So the death of a sibling for those ages 0 to 18 is 1.3%. Those that are ages 0 to 25 have lost a parent is 7.1%. So 32.4% of children lost parents in an accident, 11% to heart disease, 10.6% to cancer, 9.1% to suicide, and 5.3% to homicide, which means other causes makes up 31.6% of the losses. So I think what is easy for us to remember is that there is really not an organization or a mentoring program that does not have bereaved families within their roster. Death touches everyone, and it's our responsibility as good stewards and responsible change makers to be as trauma responsive and inclusive as we can for those that are bereaved. So this is, again, thanks to our friends at the Judy House, the a better map that kind of allows us to see where the saturation points are. So I wanted to share with you some of the statistics as it relates to your community, Kansas. So Kansas is ranked 32nd in the child bereavement estimation model, with 1 in 13 children having lost a parent or a sibling by age 18. So 1 in 13. Think about the size of your community. If you're serving any more than 13, it's likely that you have someone within your community that's been touched by loss. And 7.9% of your community, or 55,000 children in Kansas, are estimated to have lost a parent. So the Tuesday's Children approach is very much around building community. What we've learned since 9/11 is in military losses, as well as wide-scale tragedies, is that people impacted by trauma and loss tend to isolate and not seek out traditional mental health services. But programs like Tuesday's Children that build community and trust have had success in engaging these vulnerable groups. We've learned a couple things that communities really need. So one being long-term commitment and response, understanding that traumatic events have a lifelong impact on children and families, and their needs evolve and change over time. We often say at Tuesday's Children that we meet them at every age and stage through their grief trajectory. We've also codified a broad approach to outreach and service delivery, incorporating non-traditional models of engagement and bringing services directly to families in the community. So for example, when we first started, we offered a lot of what we called family fun. So it could be a baseball game, a picnic, a beach event, something that kind of allowed them to kind of take off their cloak of grief and be within a community that understood them. Also, a needs-based approach to evaluating, adapting, and evolving programs and services, including ongoing individual, family, and community needs assessments. So I'm sure in any of the webinars you've been to before in the mentoring community, very similar, having the conversation about youth-led dialogue, constituency-led dialogue, family-led dialogue, all of the core of our service model. Oops, see, I told you, not my strength. So here we go. So, so evidence-based programs that build resilience. It's important to use proven programs that have delivered results in other settings, but often these approaches need to be adapted to the population's specific needs. I can give you an example of that. I can give you a lot of examples, but for example, when we started serving the 9/11 responders, it was very apparent that asking, fire department officials, police personnel, other, very traditional industries to seek service was uncomfortable for them. They didn't see themselves as those that wanted to raise their hand and self-select into service populations. So what we did was kind of take a backdoor approach and explain to them that the healthier that they are, the healthier their children is. So what can we do to support their children and their needs? And that really allowed us to kind of infiltrate into their community, because what parent doesn't want to do the best for their child? We've learned that it's vital to carefully select and vet program partnerships with organizations such as Mentor Kansas, and make sure that there are a variety of different understandings and respects of the needs for families and a specific purpose. And finally, we can attest that incorporating family or community involvement and feedback of all stages of organizational development is so important. So we've relied on our family advisory board and a variety of different community assessments. We just released our family engagement survey to really understand their needs and make sure that we are still having their voice at the core of our decision-making process. So this is our model, our long-term healing model, circle of care. You know, we have one for the Tuesdays Children Mentoring Program, but I thought for today's discussion, it'd be better to talk about Tuesdays Children in a general sense, because our mentoring program rolls into our platform of programming. And this really shows, I hope, you know, that it all works together, that we are committing to, you know, building trust. We are committing to assessing their needs. We are committing to keeping the promise, helping them remember they are the living legacies of these people that have passed, but the memorialization is not, you know, where we stand. We are not acute grief. We are not clinical response. We are not interventions. We are helping shepherd them into a very healthy post-loss future. And I hope that what you're hearing is a lot of healing and recovery in the families in which they serve. And any questions, feel free to just come off mute and jump in. I'd love to hear from you. So to talk a little bit about kind of, again, that platform of programming, I mentioned a lot of kind of our early engagement opportunities, from ball games to picnics. And from that, what we've built is different programs like mental health and wellness, youth mentoring, which we'll talk more about because that's my passion, our career resource center, which allows for professional advisement and mentorship, our Helping Heals program, the Circle of Care, encouraging those that have been through traumatic loss to support others that might be newer to this experience, and helping them see what is possible. Skills development, and a variety of different retreats, as well as community resilience. And we'll talk more about that. I also want to note that we have an organizational subsite, which I'll put in the chat at the end, Tuesdays Children Heals, which lends itself to communities that have been impacted by mass events or tragedy. I should say mass tragedy, so apologies. So I'm wondering, since we've been chatting for about 15 or so minutes, if this is a good time, if anyone wants to kind of come off mute and kind of share more about your work. Are you working with youth that are bereaved? Are you a mentor yourself, working with a child that is post-loss? What are your experiences, and how can we, you know, make sure that we are customizing today's discussion around your expectations and needs for today?
I will just say that I work with the foster grandparent program, so AmeriCorps seniors. And so I think really just being mindful and giving our grandparents tools and kind of equipping them with even the understanding of how many kids are being affected. And so I'm just excited to hear more about that and kind of some of the best practices that you all suggest for that.
Fantastic. Do you have additional training, or is there understanding at the onset and enrollment with the youth if you're connecting one of your mentors with a youth post-loss?
I think it's a great question. We are required to have a need code for students. It can be emotional, it can be anything like that. It's really up to the teacher. And I think we've done a poor job hearing you speak about the prevalence of maybe just saying, hey, if there's a loss that obviously there's privacy rights, grandparent might not need to know everything, but having some kind of understanding, we can really help customize, like you said, help that grandparent understand what's going on and be supportive. So maybe looking at how we can be more upfront about what our grandparents can do to help with that situation, that would be appropriate.
Yeah, sounds good. And please know that you are not alone in that effort. And a lot of the conversations we have when we're at conferences such as National Association for Children's Grief, et cetera, even the school community is saying, you know, what do we put on our intake forms? What questions should we be asking so that we know kind of some of the social emotional concerns, or not even concerns, but just awareness that we should be having. If I could continue kind of on that thought, when I gave this presentation at Mentor Washington, the state, a couple months ago, somebody was sharing that their work really includes those that have been victimized by child trafficking. And I want to make it really clear that that is certainly trauma. But from where we sit at Tuesday's Children, we do not make the assumption that grief is trauma necessarily, because it looks differently for everyone else. But certainly trauma is associated with grief, and I'm sure I don't need to explain to you why. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but I hope that that's a helpful statement just in terms of trauma is not, anyways, what I said before. Anyone else want to like come off mute or share a little bit more? There's no pressure at all. I just don't want to pontificate for 45 minutes without, you know, insights or making sure we're aligned.
Our program is a truancy prevention and diversion program. So we work with youth in schools and the ADA and DCF to provide support to youth to help keep them out of the court system. Is probably the biggest ones. And if they do end up in the court system, working with them so it doesn't become an ongoing thing. So I'm sure some of our students, one of the reasons they're potentially not in school could be a death or some tragedy in the family. Since each person's unique, I don't know the numbers per se though.
I'm sure. And what's the scale of your program? Dozens, hundreds?
We work with between 60 to 100 students a year currently.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing that work. That's really important. Anyone else? Again, no pressure, just want to offer you the floor. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more kind of about the Tuesday Children Mentoring Program. I'm going to warn you that I see Amazon at the front door, so you might hear my dog say hello. Her name is Riley. She's very friendly. Okay, so the Youth Mentoring Program at Tuesday's Children, and really this is, I think, the most relatable part for our discussion today. So over the past 22 years, we've done mentoring. It really was kind of provided at the onset, and it had a lot of different forms, which we'll talk about. Majority in our program have lost a parent, although there are some nuances in that we have had children in the program that have lost a sibling. It's not our responsibility to decide, you know, what loss is more heavy than another. If someone comes to us and said, I lost my uncle and they were everything to me, then we will respond with a mentor without any hesitation. When we first started, our first 15 years were really about matching in a community-based setting. So making sure that they were in person, one-to-one. We even had site-based programs like at Bear Stearns, the corporation that's no longer, or West Point, the military academy. But now we're really a blend of e-mentoring and community-based. We call it a hybrid approach. So you could have, you know, most of your conversations over text, email, chat, and then you're getting together twice a month, once a month, for those soccer games, for those world cultural celebrations that you want to bring your mentor to. I think another interesting point about kind of what we understand from people on their bereavement journey is that there is this kind of, we call it the trauma fog or the grief fog, where, you know, you're looking at stacks of paper on your desk of all the things you have to do now that your person is no longer, and things you have to take care of. And once the dust settles a little bit, or as we say, the casseroles stop being delivered, and you're able to kind of wonder, you know, what does our family look like next? Who am I in this next phase of my life? That's when we see enrollment in Tuesday's Children. So we're not necessarily, you know, their first call, because they're making calls for things like financial assistance or scholarship resources, or you know, even bereavement services in the traditional sense of memorialization. And for us, we just really want to make sure that we're able to help them better cope with the loss, because there's so many complex emotions of grief. And we just want to, again, shepherd them into health and wellness. Not that they weren't there before, but how do we amplify that for them? So our e-mentoring program was actually ahead of the pandemic. What we were finding is with this migration into the the military program, we didn't have the luxury of being New York Metro anymore. We had to go national. So we really wanted to drop our services wherever the families were. And that was really why digital mentoring came into existence at Tuesday's Children. We needed to pivot geographically. We had a cadre of volunteers in the New York metro area and through the different corporate partnerships we had, wanting to serve, wanting to raise their hand and be that person to young people. And how do we align them? And it, you know, the pandemic, well, there were a lot of terrible losses and tragedies and hurt, there were some silver linings for us, and that families became a lot more comfortable with the idea of e-learning and digital communication. Mentors were building their skill sets in terms of how they use technology in a professional sense or in their own personal communication. So people felt a lot more comfortable. There wasn't this, you know, fear of this deep, dark web in the way that there probably was in the past. We're going to talk a lot about kind of longevity at Tuesday's Children, because that's something that's very important for those that have been through traumatic loss. But I'm wondering, you know, for you, if, you know, this is aligning with kind of the model that your mentoring program looks like. I heard from two of you that one sounded site-based, the grandparent program sounded site-based in a school setting. And the program focused on those that have been touched by the juvenile justice system. I don't know if we talked about kind of what model your program is within, but I'm hoping that it's aligned with one of these, whether it's community-based or digital. So the emphasis on longevity. So over the last 2 decades, our mentoring matches for bereaved youth have exceeded the national average. Some have lasted over a decade. I can tell you my husband was a mentor in the mentoring program. That's not how we met, I promise. And his mentee's mom was actually at our wedding. So you really build lives that intertwine with one another. And it's really exciting to see them celebrate so many milestones together. I love this slide because you can see these cute little faces and how much they've grown since their time with their mentor. Of the matches that we've graduated, so many, I mean, one was between 0 and 3 months, 3 between 9 and 12, 6 between 1 and 2. And this is a lot of detail, but what I hope you're hearing from me is that so many of our matches are past a year. And we work really, really hard to avoid early match closures, which I'm sure you guys are talking about in elements of effective practice and beyond, and making sure that, you know, this is something where as each child is grieving and going through the different, we don't consider them stages of grief, but, you know, as the difference between an adult grieving and a child grieving is that children regrieve through the different developmental milestones. They're experiencing grief in different ways. And we can talk a little bit more about that. I'm happy to share some resources after that that kind of gives you an understanding of what it looks like developmentally. But you know, a lot of what we talk about is social emotional, and there's other considerations like physical health, etc. So this is a little bit about our mentoring survey in terms of what we're seeing in success rates. Couple other things I wanted to add is that 71% of the children say their mentor is someone they can trust, and they have someone they can talk to about risks that they're feeling. 75% of the parents indicated that communication with their children has improved since participation in the mentoring program. Close to 75% of parents reported increased self-esteem and confidence in their children. And what you're probably seeing is that our metrics are not necessarily academically driven, but they are aligned with the Connor-Davidson resiliency scale, looking at ability to adapt with stress, looking at feelings of hopelessness and feelings of isolation and feelings of depression and self-esteem. 94% of our mentors report that their communication has improved with their mentees since they were first matched. And my favorite is 94% of them say that their life satisfaction, their self worth has been increased because they have taken on the role of being a mentor. So this is the part where I'm hoping we can have about, 15 or so minutes to kind of talk about what is trauma responsive programming and hopefully how you can bring that into what you're doing and the incredible work that you each are spearheading at your own organizations. Does anyone kind of want to throw out there what they feel like trauma informed or trauma responsive is? And I can give you a little hint. I use trauma responsive because it's action oriented as opposed to trauma informed. And there are some nuances to both terms, but for the purposes of today's discussion, either is fine, just in terms of an awareness of trauma and how it shapes, or how it hopefully should shape the way we respond to those post-loss. Okay, no worries. So that's my job.
I was going to jump in, Sarah, and say it has something to do with maybe self-regulation or getting to a place where a child is able to self-regulate.
I love that. Yes, absolutely. My son today didn't like the choices that were offered at school, so I had to bring him a different lunch. So in that moment, I wish that he had built some more self-regulation skills, because his teacher definitely didn't need that this morning. So yes, I'm sorry if that sounded trite in terms of my example, but regulation is hard when you're a little person. Big feelings are big feelings. So thank you for sharing that. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the 5 principles of trauma responsive care, and then we'll talk about how it relates to staff and mentors. So trauma-informed care is an important concept to consider when working with any youth, but it's really an approach that assumes that an individual is more than likely to have trauma. So like we were talking about before, considering the fact that 1 in 13 children in Kansas have had bereavement, it's likely that it's touching so many of those that you serve. It recognizes the presence of trauma symptoms and acknowledges the role trauma might play in an individual's life. Also, I want to acknowledge, and we talked about this before, when we're working with volunteers, encouraging them to be responsive is great, because it encourages them it empowers them to know that this is within their sphere. For an organizational perspective, trauma-informed care changes culture to emphasize respecting all appropriately and responding to the effects of trauma at all levels. So the intention is not to treat individuals, but to provide support and related services in ways that's accessible and appropriate to those who have experienced trauma. I have to say that one of the things I've seen, and is very hard to watch, is there is a risk for triggering or worsening symptoms. And you've heard the phrase re-traumatization. So without being especially mindful, well-educated on this practice, there is an increased risk of harm. So this is a great responsibility, and I appreciate and applaud you each for dialing in today, because it's showing how much you want to elevate your skills. So the first one we're going to talk about is kind of safety. So ensuring that there is physical and emotional well-being. One of the things I would consider is, how do you create a welcoming environment for your mentee, or how do you support your mentors to curate that experience? Are you respecting privacy? Are you helping them feel like they can show up as they are? Are you helping them understand that, they can be authentic with you? Their authentic self is what you value, and that shows trust on both sides. The second thing I would encourage you to consider is choice. We all know that providing youth with control empowers them. So I would encourage you to ask yourself, ask the mentors that you're supervising, how are you providing a clear and appropriate message about individuals' rights and responsibilities? I can say that again because I think it's important. How are you providing clear and appropriate message about individuals' rights and responsibilities? You have the right, Johnny, to feel safe. You have the right to make sure that your dignity is maintained. Someone does not have the right to put you in a place of defense. The third would be collaboration, making decisions with the individual and sharing that power. I'm sure you guys have heard of the concept adultism, and I would, if you haven't, encourage you to explore that, because it's so prevalent in so many mentors that are providing services. It's not anything usually done with malice. It's just a lack of information and possibly a slight amount of ignorance in thinking that, the mentor is the dominant in the relationship. If you're not allowing the mentee to get the same amount of control and power, you're not giving them the space and the opportunity to know and feel their worth. So think critically about how your organization is providing a significant role for individuals in planning and evaluation of services. One of the things we do at Tuesdays Children is every month we have a peer-to-peer discussion group. One of our staff members pushes in and kind of leads the dialogue, but if they come with their own needs or their own situation they want to work through, or if they even come and they just want to have a squad of cheerleaders cheer them on for a huge win that they had, that's tremendous, and we love that too. Second to last would be the idea of trustworthiness, setting tasks with clarity, consistency, and interpersonal boundaries. So I would encourage you to always check your self-awareness. Be responsive and know that maintaining professional boundaries and your own personal boundaries is not a bad thing. I know it's uncomfortable, especially in a mentoring relationship, because, we're all naturally wanting to kind of bend ourselves into a pretzel to make sure that the youth is the priority. But if something's making you or them feel like it's uncomfortable, there's nothing wrong with leaning into that and having an open dialogue about it. And the last being empowerment, prioritizing empowerment and skill building. So I'm wondering for each of you, and this is something for a thought, not meant to share unless you'd like to, is can you state with conviction that you're providing an atmosphere that allows for individuals to be validated and affirmed with each contact? One of the things that I think is really interesting is when you think about different ways of, changing your language. So many times you hear mentors say, I'm proud of you, I'm proud of you, I'm proud of you. And that's a great statement, and they should be. And any opportunity to recognize and praise is important. But I would encourage people to flip the script a little bit and say, I'm proud of you, and I really hope that you're proud of yourself. Getting them to think about, there's so much to this, and your pride in them is important, but their pride in themselves is just as important. So talking about mentors specifically, there's evidence, obviously we know that relationships can help youth recover and thrive after experiencing trauma. We only have about 10 more minutes to kind of go through this discussion and leave time for Q&A, but if you haven't already seen it, I would encourage you to check out the video, The Fox and the Bear by Brene Brown, because considering the difference between empathy and sympathy is really an important one when you're thinking about being trauma responsive and strength-based. To have sympathy, or one might say pity, isn't necessarily serving the youth that you're working with. You want to make sure that there's empathy, there's relatability, and an understanding that you care, but that you're not putting them into a box in that way. So this is really in no particular order, but one being comfort. So volunteers should really be trained and coached and supervised to be patient and calm. Tierney talked about self-regulation, and I would put that within this heading. When children are under stress, try practicing activities that can help them cope when they do feel stress. I would also say that encourage them to have these opportunities when they're not feeling activated, to practice what they would like to do when they are feeling activated. Because sometimes it can be hard to kind of figure that out. There's a ton of research out there as to different tools and techniques. I would say that if you have mentors that have children that are have a higher rate of stress, put some of those materials in front of them and encourage them to research them themselves. Ask them, is this developmentally appropriate for the youth that you're working with? For some of the little kids, this practice where you go 1, 2, 3, and like really count down, not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be for the little ones, but it's going to look a lot different for a 16-year-old. And what would that look like, and what would work for a youth? Another one is listening, right? We all know that as mentors and mentoring practitioners. Be open to their ideas and opinion. Ask open-ended questions that require more than a yes or no answer. Ask clarifying questions if you're unsure of what they meant. That is so interesting. Tell me more about that. What led you to ask me that question? Certainly in difficult situations, if a mentor is feeling like kind of frozen, that's the first thing I encourage them to consider. Maybe they ask you about something like, drugs and alcohol, and that isn't something you want to necessarily self-disclose personally, but maybe you say, is there something that happened that's leading you to ask me that question today? Can you tell me more about that? You didn't answer it, but you allowed them the space to think about how they can continue the dialogue. The third would be inspire them. So ask them who their role models are and what they liked about them. That's the way I start all of our basic mentor trainings, asking each individual, who would you put in the mentor category? A lot of times you get parents, coaches, teachers. I love when I get someone that's kind of a natural mentor, that is someone that they really kind of want to emulate in different ways. Oh, I had this neighbor and he had a real commitment to service and that kind of thing. It's really exciting when they think about the what rather than the who. And help them really, illuminate what are those qualities that they valued so much, and possibly emulate them, because that will help them and coach them into being the best mentor they can be. Another one would be collaboration. So engaging them with step-by-step problem-solving skills until you reach a solution. I don't think there's much more to say there, but I had a mentor recently reach out and he asked me a question about wanting to help his mentee buy a present for his mentee's mom's holiday. And we talked about kind of, what do you do in the short term? What do you do in the long term? So this is a greater learning than you just providing a $20 bill. Celebration. So probably my favorite. So encouraging trial and error, problem-solving skills to teach them how to persevere. I do want to say the caveat with this is you want to set realistic and attainable goals. I would not encourage you to start on day one saying, my lifelong goal is to go to Harvard. well, is that realistic and attainable? We want to make sure that not only are we giving them some ideas on ways in which they could have self-improvement, but be able to see those to fruition. So keep in mind too, though, that you can celebrate through the process. And even if things don't go as planned, you're applauding their effort. So I think the other thing I just, want to share about kind of how you can support, oops, sorry, I did it again. Support your mentors is, ask the underlying question, what happened? And then, the symptoms that you'll see and their adaptation to the traumatic event, it can be difficult, but the healing happens through the positive relationships like mentoring. So I hope that helps a little bit. And then rounding the bases here, we are just as responsible as the mentors, if not more, for our part in being as trauma responsive as possible. And I want to say that we've spent, 40 or so minutes talking about how the youth are, post-loss in so many cases, but chances are the mentors have had loss experiences themselves. So it's a good reminder that this is just a general good practice in general. So one would be to teach and develop all staff and mentors. So, even consider asking your executive director, or if you are the executive director, give your board 15 minutes of how they can be trauma responsive. Remind your marketing team that the language that they're using should be strength-based when they push it out. I would encourage them, not to say victim. I would encourage them to say survivor. Being really, really mindful that words matter. I would also encourage you to be mindful and empathetic from intake to matching to graduation. Constantly, coming to a place of, service, but also just grace and empathy. I also want to say, and we'll talk a little bit more in a couple seconds about self-care, but there's a tendency, especially at 2-stage children, those that have experienced loss feel like they are naturally a fit for this work. And that's not necessarily wrong, but they have to be really aware. Are they at a point in their grief trajectory where this is a healthy engagement for them? There are some people that maybe now is not the right time for them because it will re-traumatize or activate things that they are still working through. And connect youth and families to resources and services as needed. I remember early on in my career, every time someone asked for something, I jumped. And it didn't serve me and it didn't serve them. We work within a network and an ecosystem of peers. So, I would encourage you, if there's something that is outside of the bounds of your nonprofit, point them in the right direction, but don't feel like you have to put yourself into a pretzel. I would also encourage you to be steadfast in your commitment to excellence, always with child safety as your guiding principle. So run yourself through the elements of effective practice, do the NQMS. Tierney didn't pay me to do this, I promise, but sign up for things like technical assistance and be really committed to ever empowering and evolving your capacity as a leader. And then model and practice self-care. Do what you need to do to bring you joy, realize when your battery is low, and, pour into your own cup. We're all people in this community that got into this work, for a variety of different reasons, but I can make a pretty educated guess, that you all pour just as much into this program as I do, and it can be tiring and exhausting. And so definitely remember to fill your own cup. And then I love ending or almost ending with this, and I realize the thumbnail is small, but I mean, if you can see that the gentleman in the middle is the same gentleman. So this goes, excuse me, from 2007 to present day. So this is Jim. He's a gentleman with the mustache. His mentees, Nicholas and Matthew, who are brothers. In 2001, on September 11th, Jim lost his brother, Joseph, and Matthew and Nicholas lost their dad. And all in the World Trade Center. These two did not know each other, but Tuesday's Children put them on the same path. And what's great is that Jim was matched with Matthew, the older of the two boys. And a couple years later, their mom, Nicole, called and said, Nicholas is ready for a mentor. And I was like, oh, okay, great, I'll start looking. She was like, no, you don't have to look. He's right here. And I thought, well, can he take on two? And it's non-traditional, right? But it was kind of what worked for them. And Jim couldn't imagine it any other way. So as the boys have gotten older, and yes, it's hard to see because they have their masks on, but like they now have mustaches themselves. And they continue to be present in each other's lives. So both Matthew and Nicholas are college graduates, and Jim was recently matched with a new mentee, actually. His name is Andrew. So the power of every mentor, it just takes one. I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know each of you know this well and in your bones, but I cannot say enough to those that we serve. We can't do this work without you. And whatever we can do to empower you and to show appreciation, we want to do. So how to get involved, we're on social media. I will offer my email, and you can reach out anytime. Love to continue the collaboration. I want to thank you for your time today, your diligence, the work that you're doing in your community. And I really want you to remember how much power you have. I want to thank you for keeping the promise to these living memorials of so many of those that have passed on. And I'm happy to talk and have dialogue and have Q&A together. You have about 6 minutes.
Yes, I agree, KJ. Round of applause. Absolutely.
See,
Well, I have to.
not my thing. I was missing. Okay. You're welcome, Mackenzie. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let me drop my email in the chat. And I'll follow up with Tierney with my slides. And I will also provide the subsite for Tuesday's Children. It's called Tuesday's Children Heals, HEALS, which is codification of 22 years of lessons learned. If there's any modules that you want to talk more about, I'm here. And yeah, anything you need.
Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you again, Sara, for showcasing the work that you and the organization Tuesday's Children does. It's such an important organization in the work. So thank you again. And also for amplifying the importance of mentoring and, how that impacts all of our lives. I mean, from the mentor to the mentee, and the ways in which that we can all sort of enhance our lives from it. So does anyone else have any last thoughts or questions they'd like to share? So I do appreciate everyone for joining us today. This is the final one for 2023, and I think we ended on a wonderful note, and it's been a pleasure to have you, Sara, so thank you. Again, this will be posted, so feel free to share this with anyone you feel that would benefit from this information. And please, if you don't have access to the newsletter, sign up, because we're going to have some great things to offer in 2024 that I'm excited to roll out. So, all right, guys, well, enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you guys soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.